Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much to stay here. It's my pleasant duty to welcome you all, to this meeting, especially to RDA Steering Committee and its chair, Gordon Dunsire. It's a great pleasure for us to have you all here and that you have accepted our offer as the venue for your second meeting in this year, 2017. As you all probably know, since the publication of the first draft of RDA in 2008, the National Library of Spain has closely followed the evolution of this cataloging standard, trying to study it carefully and analyzing the advantage, disadvantage, and implication of its implementation in our institution. In May 2010, RDA Toolkit was released and a period of free access was offered. The Spanish National Library took the opportunity then to perform an experimentation test with that new tool. The results of this test serve as the basis of the work carried out by the National Library of Spain, RDA Working Group. Our library is one of the 4 founding members of EURIG, the European Interest Group in RDA. This group, dedicated to the debate of the specificities of RDA in relation to its implementation in European libraries, has acted as a vital agent for the approach of positions between the European libraries and the Joint Steering Committee for the Development of RDA. Since its establishment in 2011, the National Library of Spain has been an active member of this group, and through the publication of specific reports about the deliberation of its meetings, we have tried to act as a liaison between EURIG and Spanish libraries. Taking a step as important as the adoption of a new cataloging standard is not a risk-free, and in the National Library of Spain, we have always been aware of the significance of such a decision. Thus, in May 2014, the National Library of Spain carried out a survey with the objective of knowing what the rest of the libraries in our country thought about the subject. Through this survey, we could verify that the implementation of RDA in Spain was still in an initial phase, and that were mainly university libraries that were considering that decision. 3 years ago, we were not ready to move forward to RDA. In December 2014, the National Library of Spain, aware that its decision would condition the majority of the libraries of the country, chose to continue working to find the best accommodation in RDA in our cataloging practice, and we made a public announcement in this sense. We did not stand still anyway. Following the announcement in late 2014, the Spanish National Library launched a working group dedicated to the study of RDA, integrated by cataloging professionals from the different departments of the library, along with other colleagues from the Spanish Council of Research Libraries and the Regional Library of Castilla y León, who accepted our invitation to take part in this working group. The studies carried out by this working group led us to the final decision about the adoption of RDA last year, 2016. We count on all of you to guide us in this path that we have decided to follow. We know that we are not alone, and we'll try to do our best to contribute to the development and wide adoption of RDA. We are all conscious of the importance of this meeting. We are all looking forward to see how the new RDA Toolkit is going to look like and affect our daily cataloging practice, and of course, how the standard is going to develop in the future. Besides, the RDA translators meeting seems to us an incredible opportunity to look carefully at the problem derived for the different use of a specific language. I wish you a pleasant and fruitful stay in our library. As our guest, we hope that you can develop your work in the best conditions. Let us know if we can help you anytime. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for helping us, and I hope you are going to enjoy your time in Spain. Madrid is a wonderful city. Enjoy it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that great speech. I'm Gordon Dunsire. I am the chair of the RDA Steering Committee, and I will chair the rest of this session. So I'd like to welcome everybody. It's really great to see so many people in the audience. But we have three types of people in the audience. The first category, I'm a cataloger, you see. The first category is the members of RSC, the RDA Steering Committee, and the chairs of the various RDA working groups. So they're all kind of sitting at the front. I'd like them all to stand up so that the rest of you know who to talk to. Okay, so these are the people that you can give suggestions to, give complaints to, and talk about the future of RDA with. The second set of people in the audience are translators of RDA. They are here for a special meeting with RSC this afternoon, a closed meeting about translations. However, if any of the local Spanish people in the audience want to know how RDA is really being adopted in other countries, speak to one of the translators. So please, could the translators stand up so that people know who you are? Okay. And then we have proper catalogers and librarians from Spain, who are our main audience. So I'd like to welcome everybody. On the podium here, we have the speakers. So this is Damien Eisenminger, who is chair of the music working group, but also a member of the aggregates working group. So he'll be talking with me about the aggregates and serials issues. This is Kate James, who is the examples editor. Again, if you have questions about examples, this is the person to talk to. Then we have Linda Barnhart, who is the RSC secretary. So she does all the proper work for us. And then finally, there is the man with the credit card, the publisher, Jamie Hennelly at the end. So we will try to speak reasonably slowly so that the translators can keep up. I apologize that all of the presentations are in English, but English is the language of RDA. I don't have any housekeeping. If a fire alarm goes off or anything untoward happens, then members of the BNE will steer us safely out of the rooms. So they will stand up and immediately start herding the catalogers. Okay, I'm done. Hey, we're on time now. So I think we should move straight in. The format of the day is that this morning is that we will give presentations, but we will leave time at the end for questions, answers, and discussions. So we do want feedback from the audience, from everybody. But that will be at the end. Jamie says that he's quite happy if people just interrupt him in the middle of his presentation because he's going to show us all the visual stuff. So, Jamie, you're up first. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. So, as Gordon introduced me, I am James Henley, or Jamie, and I'm responsible for the toolkit, so everything you hate about the toolkit is my fault, and everything, I'm also in charge of fixing it. So I'm going to show you what are basically screenshots of the new toolkit that we're designing and building, and hopefully you'll like it. If you don't like it, please tell me. And I am open to questions throughout this process, because I know as you see something, you may have an immediate response to it. Feel free to share. This is our new logo. I don't know if you remember our old logo, but this is a little cleaner, a little more modern, a little more up-to-date. It uses a traditional print font with kind of a newer online version. Let me see if I got this going right. Oh, I know I gotta go here. I'm going to be, is this on? I'm going to be jumping back and forth here. That's the new steering committee logo. All these colors are colors you'll see in the toolkit, the new toolkit design. That's the board. The board is part of the governing body. And here's the new toolkit label. So I'm just showing you these out of interest and kind of warming you up to what eventually will be. This is, oops, did that. I want to. This is the new login page. When you come to access.rdatoolkit.org, this is what you'll see. You can see some navigation at the top. There's a new login box. One of our goals for the new toolkit is that we have a single login instead of the double login where you have to log into your account and then your profile. In this new design, you simply use your profile login and you're into the toolkit. If you have IP authentication, you should go right in. We're even looking into a way that it can retain your profile login, so you just come to the toolkit and you're logged automatically in. We're trying to put more content on this page. You can see we have this news section that will pull blog posts from the site. At first, these will only be in English, but down the road we can talk about making the space available for translators to put up information about their own translations, etc. Or to translate the news information that we put out about RDA. On the other side here, we'll have just some information that'll pull out what instructions were updated for release, etc., to make this stuff more available to you. And finally, we have this area. It's called products right now. I think we're actually looking into building a new section called RDA Learning Center, which will, and this is open to products beyond ALA or co-publishers-based products, but if there's a new book or a new major, if there's a webinar or training session for RDA that people want to advertise or promote, they can let us know and we can add it to this learning center area. So it becomes a place where people can find out information about RDA events. Oops, I keep doing that. So this is the logged in page. And one of the key points here is in this area right here. You see when you're logged in, it'll show you your recently viewed instructions. So when you get logged out of the toolkit and you come back to it, you don't have to spend time figuring out where you were. You can immediately go to the instructions or documents that you were more recently looking at. So that's one of the things we're trying to do to help make the toolkit a bigger part of your, and a better part, I should say, of your cataloging day. We also have this document section, which is just, again, an opportunity for you to see what documents, and by documents here, I'm talking about what's in the toolkit right now are known as workflows. We're changing that name because it can be more than workflows, just changing it to documents or contributed documents or user-created documents. And we're adding the ability for you to subscribe to certain documents because there's so many. You can go in and prioritize and say, oh, I only want to see documents from the British Library or from the Spanish National Library or something like that. And this will tell you if any of those documents have been recently updated and that you subscribe to, and it'll also tell you if you contributed documents, if there's new people subscribing to them or something like that. I'm not exactly sure what we intended there. I got to talk to my developer about that. But it will give you some idea of kind of what's going on, the activity with the documentation. And then finally, there's a quick reference to some of your profile links. In the new toolkit, profiles are going to be very important. There is going to be a subscription level profile, and I'll show you this later, that basically your institution will create its own profile for the all of the staff, and they'll set preferences and documentation, subscriptions, et cetera, like that for the staff. And then the individual staff member can go in and add to that with their own personal profile. I'll show all this to you as we go. Okay, so these are some of the navigation. These are some of the new navigation parts of the toolkit. So you can see here under entities, which will be in the header, what it is, that'll drop down all the RDA entities, the chapters on each RDA entity. So you can navigate directly to the entity. Next to that is guidance. Those are refer to the general guidance chapters. So that's how you'll navigate to those. And then policies. So that's the policy statements. And that will take you to, if you just want to see only the policy statements. So if you only want to see Library of Congress policy statements, you click there and it'll list them. I'll show you a drop-down menu for that in a little bit. But and then resources is just kind of, I think we've updated that title to other resources. Right now, that would include things like the books of the Bible documents we have on there and medium of performance. And I decided I would leave AACR2 on the toolkit just for people who love it dearly. But that kind of material would go under the resources. So you can see in the upper right, there's Alice Green. That drop-down menu is here, and that's where you would simply go to manage your profile or log out. The Views button, so you have at the top, you have bookmarks, your documents. These are all kind of your profile-related resources. And then you have views, and I'll show you a little bit more about views later. This again has to do with the personal profile and the institution profile. But you also, this is where you could change your language, do your quick change of language, or get your dual view. Some folks like to be able to look at the English and RDA in a different translation at the same time. So we'll keep that ability. And then finally, this is the new search interface. Instead of having the advanced search page that you go to, you simply have a single search box and you have a drop-down menu that you can choose to filter off of that to just search RDA only or policies or contributed documents. You can filter there. And then once you get to the search results page, you can add more filters. Oh, thanks. Okay. This is an instruction page. Look at that. Okay, so over here is going to be a graphical interface, browse. So this is kind of a graphic representation of how RDA is structured. And it's our intention that this becomes the primary navigation tool. This is still in development. I'm not going to show you much about this right now, but it's there and it's what we're working on. Title, definition. This piece is still in development too. It's called element reference. But basically the idea is when you click on that button, it'll open up a box that'll tell you just kind of the quick reference type information about that element, what entity it belongs to, mark mapping, user tasks, fourfold path information. All this information will also be in the registry, associated with the element in the registry, and it'll get pulled in automatically from the registry and put into here. So the content of that box is still kind of under development, and it always can change, so it's kind of thing where we could definitely use your feedback on if you think there's an important piece of essential information for each element that you'd like to see in there, let us know. I'm not going to go over the structure of the internal structure of a element. That's kind of more of an RSC decision, and I'll let them talk about that. But it will basically follow something like you see here. I'll kind of just scroll through this so you can see it. You can see at the bottom here another navigation element. You can just move element by element through a chapter. So if you're in the manifestation chapter, you can use these buttons to kind of go back and forth between the elements. So, I apologize. It's a little clumsy, but I want to make sure you can see everything. So, related policies here, you see the two. So, in the new toolkit, with policy statements, our expectation is because we're adding more and more policy statements to the toolkit, you don't need to see all of them. So, our thought is you will subscribe to which ones you want to see. You will set preferences in your profile to which policy statements you want to see. And you will choose a preferred policy statement, your first preference for a policy statement. So when you see 2 here, that means there are policy statements from 2 different institutions related to media type. In this case, it's LC and BLPS, because this person is subscribed to the LC policy statement, and the star means they've made it their first preference, and they subscribe to the BL, British Library policy statements. In this drop-down, you can also see that there are here are all the other policy statements. The ones that are grayed out don't have a policy statement with this element. The ones that are black do, and you can open those too if you want, if you see that and you want to open that one. So You can either click on the related policies to display them, or you can set in your preferences that they always display. This is the policy statement right here. There's a little line here that goes across that says this policy statement is in regards to this recording instruction. So that's kind of locates it. And it's going to show it right alongside. During our user group work and discussions about what we should do with the new toolkit, one of the common refrains was that they didn't want to have to click back and forth or toggle back and forth between policy statements and instructions. So we tried to put them in line. This is an example put together by our developer, and I wouldn't necessarily say it reflects what we typically see in the toolkit. Typically, the option has a policy statement, maybe more so than this recording, but you can see right here in the right column is supposed to be the policy statement. Now, we know that some policy statements are very short. Like, if it were for this option, it might just say, apply this option. But we also know that some policy statements are quite long. So we've set a maximum of 50 words, or we'll have some kind of character limit on what we display in the right column. And then if it goes beyond that, we'll have a link that will take you to the policy statement. So I think in many cases, you'll see the entire policy statement right here alongside, but in some cases, you will have to navigate to the policy statement. So there's a case where you can see what the link would look like that takes you to the policy statement. So one of the other ways that we're using this right column space is to allow you to preview a cross-reference to see if you want to click through to it or not. So this little icon where the hand is over, that's a preview. And if you click on that, the first 50 words or so of the instruction that it references will appear in the right column. This will, if you have your policy statements open, this will close your policy statements and this will open. If you close this back up, your policy statement should reappear. Now, if you don't need the preview and you just want to go directly to the cross-reference, you just click the title and it'll take you through. What you see here is a vocabulary list of terms, and hopefully you can see it in the back, but these terms have an orange underline to them. It's fairly subtle, but that means there's a definition there. And if you click on those words, you'll get the definition that pops up here. So there's no need to navigate to the glossary. The information's all right there for you. This is the new user tool. So you can kind of highlight any part of the page and right-click, and you'll get this menu. So you can choose to bookmark, which is just simply leave a mark that this is something I like to visit, or you can leave a note, and that allows you to put in text and link, etc. Or you can get the URL for this particular space. So you can, if you're creating your own documentation, you want to link to this instruction. That's where you get the URL. Yes.
Is that open to the institutional profile or just
both?
Repeat the question.
He asked if these options were available only at the institution level or also at the personal level. And the answer is both. You can do it. You can leave a bookmark for yourself, or you can leave a bookmark for your institution. Any notes or bookmarks always have the option to share globally, share locally, or keep private. So there's no share global, though, on these things. When I say share globally, it means it gets shared with all Toolkit users everywhere. So. This is just a quick look at the dialog boxes associated with those tools. There's the link. Here's the bookmark. I'll show you this a little bit later, but the bookmarks and notes include abilities. You can create folders and you can organize your bookmarks, etc., if you want, if there's some need for that. You can also see that it allows you to get a notification if it's say a note that's shared locally and someone goes in and changes it, it'll send you a notification. You can get a notification that this note has changed.
Is it possible to have two layers, so to speak, of institutional policies? Because I think there's a lot of countries having a national profile, and then they decide the national profile as a library profile.
Yes, there is. I'll show you this when we get to the views area. But you can create multiple views of the toolkit, and it'll be clear later when I have the interface to show you on that. There's this saved search. You can also share a saved search locally, I believe. This is just a quick look at what the glossary will look like. Again, the glossary will kind of be a standalone document on its own. Most of the terms that exist in the instructions, you'll be able to get their definitions right there without coming to the glossary. But you should also, the glossary is a quick reference that will be available to you. This is a search results page. So you can see at the top here it shows RDA documents first. It shows 10 of 138 search results. And you can see there's other sections of the search results, contributed documents, policies. And you can click to go through to see just that part of it. You can also filter add these filters on the side to things to narrow your search results or your search display. And you can set these in your profile too if you want to kind of keep a permanent filter on what you see with your search results. Scroll back up so you can see. You can see you can narrow to instructions or the glossary. You can narrow on examples. Mappings. The mappings are going to change a bit. I can talk about that a little bit later. Here's some other references. Just a quick look at the bookmarks and notes interface. You can see the folders that you can create, different things that you can do. This means edit, delete. There's where you add a new folder, information about access, local or private. This is the contributed documents area. So contributed documents, like the workflows, can be shared globally with all the Toolkit members, locally or private. Across the very top, you can see we have what we branded as kind of different types of workflows. This is just our best guess at kind of types of documents people might have. If you have other ideas or names for these things, we're happy to add them. That's not a big deal. So just let us know what you think is a useful document designation here. One of the things we're adding with this new document creator is you can have multiple authors for a single document. So you can have multiple owners. This has been a problem in the past, is that only one person could access and edit a document on the toolkit for an institution. We're going to add the ability for multiple people to own a document and share the editorial work for it. So there'll be a checkout. If someone's working on it, no one else can. But when they check it back in, other people can work on it, etc. Yes. You're asking if we can add new authors to existing documents? Yes, I would think that would be entirely possible. We'll also add this, as I mentioned before, the ability to subscribe to different documents. And I'll show you, I think this is the next one. You can subscribe to an institution as a whole that contributes documents. So if you want to, say, subscribe to Libraries Archives Canada, you can see all of the documents that they put up, or you can subscribe only to specific documents. So this is the new HTML editor display. This emblem right here, you click that and it pops it out into a bigger single screen. So you can actually work on it. This is a very condensed version, so you can't really write in it. But you can see the options. You give it a title, you give it a language, you can choose a license. And here's where you add authors. So you can have multiple authors here. Give it a version, access, etc., category. And then here are the macro buttons you can use as you build your document. And this would be this area at the bottom would be where you type. And it can be, you can see here, it can be expanded and made into a normal size workspace. And this is an example of subscribing to document workflows. So you can choose the institution, British Library, or you can choose individual documents within that. Okay. So here are the views. This is the Manage Views area. We have, by default, we're going to create an institution view that will be kind of the general view for any institution. We'll probably have a default setting for, say, a new subscriber. We'll have a default setting based on probably what language or what location they're in. So, if we have a new Swedish library subscribed, we'll just default them to English language, but they'll also get the Swedish policy statements. But the actual subscription manager can go in and change and set the institution profile exactly as they want it. So in this institution interface, you can see you have the ability to set policies that you want to display here in the center, and you have your primary that you set. You can also choose to keep policy statements always open when you're going through the instructions or not. You also can set preferences for examples, the different type of example displays you want to see, and you can choose to have those open or not. That's the element reference, excuse me. You can choose to have the element reference always open or not. Over here you have access to select the RDA template, and that's kind of looking forward to the future. When we roll out 3R in June, we're just going to have one RDA template, and it'll be the standard RDA list of instructions, etc. But in the future, we foresee being able to display certain filtered or adopted views of RDA instructions for specific subject groups, like, say, music or law or something like that. So we're building the infrastructure for that capacity, but we won't be able to roll that out till later, in a time after the 3R project is completed. But this is where you would kind of be able to apply that filter. You can say, oh, I just want to see the RDA for music, and you could add that to the view. You have language, you have access. It's an institutional wide view as opposed to a personal view that's only available to you. So see, as you go down, you can add more and more of these views. So you could have multiple institution views, you could have multiple personal views for if you have like specific projects that you're working on and you want to set RDA up for a certain interaction because of that project, you can create that view. Excuse me. And that view would always be available to you just at the top of the screen there in the navigation, so you could click it on pretty easily and have that adjustment to the toolkit. How am I doing? I'm good? Okay. So one of the other pieces of feedback we got on this was that people wanted a better information after each release, and they also wanted to start adding release or revision information associated with the translations. Right now you just get it for English. So we're adopting this new approach, which I call release notes, and we'll make this available to all the translations. It basically includes links off to policy statement changes. So institutions that are writing policy statements, it's kind of up to you to write your own updates about what you changed in your policy statements. But we can provide links to that information. And then we will have a brief narrative about what changed in the toolkit from a functional point of view. And then there would be a table of the instructions that were revised, and a brief note on what happened, if it was revised or deleted or new examples added, some kind of brief statement about what happened. Now, there was a lot of input that people wanted to see a kind of track changes or difference version of the revisions to the instructions, and that proved to be technologically difficult and not cost-effective to do. So what our solution is that we will provide, with each new release, we of course offer PDFs of each chapter that you can print out. In addition to this, we will add a instruction archive of old PDFs. Here, so you'll be able to download the old version of the chapter that changed. And then you can take those, and we have a list of, for right now, we have a list of PDF let me start over. We have a list of software that allows you to run difference reports on PDFs. So you basically drop in your new PDF and your old PDF. It processes them and tells you what has changed, shows you what has changed between those two documents. a year or two from now, we might put one of those, if we find one of those, a particular software that we think is really good and effective, we might look into getting a license and putting it into the toolkit so that you can just do it there. In the meantime, you'll have to, a lot of them are free and online, so you can, it's pretty easy to access them and run a diff report. But down the line, we might actually add that into the toolkit and have that tool right there for folks to generate diff reports. Oh, look, I did it. All right, so I mean, that was pretty much everything I wanted to show you right now. I will add our target date for release of 3R is June 13th. On that June 13th day, it'll be RDA in English. I'm hopeful that we could have a translation at the same time, but I'm hopeful. I'm not certain that will happen. We will have a release following that in August or September, and that will definitely have to have some translations in it. So that's kind of stuff that needs to get worked out this afternoon and over the next couple months. So I hope to have more to report about that soon, but that's our goal. I think that's it. Yes?
On the release notes, will the English original document be available to translators so that they could prepare a translation of was wondering, for the release notes, will the original English document be available to translators so that we can translate those release notes in each translation of RDA, and maybe add any other changes that are specific to translation?
I mean, I think that's, the answer is yes, I would make them available as soon as I could to translators. But I think it's also a different question of what are the translators translating, because their release notes should reflect what changed in that translation. So they can borrow from the English as they see fit or whatever. I mean, it's an interesting user question. Does the user want to know in translation how the English changed for that release, as well as how, say, the French translation changed?
But I just assume that any changes to the basic English text will be reflected in all of the translations. So if a rule changes in English, every user in any language will be interested to know what changed.
In the English?
Yeah, no, in their language, but
okay.
we could adapt that basic document and...
but, you know, it's a different thing. I mean, the answer to your question is yes, but the caveat is if Maria Lisa hasn't updated the Finnish translation in 6 months, and we've had 2 releases during that time, her release notes will be specific to what changed in Finnish, which is very different from what changed in any English version of the release notes. So she kind of has to do her own. I mean, she can borrow from the English release notes as she sees fit, but she's going to have to kind of create her own release note. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Jamie. And I'd like to just take a moment to echo Gordon's thanks to the National Library here for hosting the RSC. We are delighted to be here, and we thank you so much for all of your help and support with our work. So Jamie has talked to you a little bit this morning about the user interface, about navigation, and about the overall user experience for the new toolkit. My colleague Kate James and I are now going to talk a little bit about the changes to the RDA content itself. And I will post these slides and the slides from later in this event on the RSC website after this event, so you can look for these slides there. Oh, thank you. So there are several reasons that RSC chose to change RDA content at the same time as the rest of the interface changes with the 3R project. The primary driver is the RSC's desire to move ahead in implementing the IFLA library reference model. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. I have special slides for that one. RSC also wanted to use this opportunity to resolve some long-standing issues and inconsistencies, such as how RDA handles aggregates, or how the structural issues with the lengthy and specialized instructions for musical works, legal works, religious works, and official communications. We know that libraries are under enormous pressure to do more with less staff. With this redesign, RDA will be clearer about its methods for recording data, which will allow for better machine and batch processing. Finally, expanding and refining the RDA ontology, which supports the instructions and uses RDF, the Resource Description Framework, moves library data toward a linked data environment. So in brief, that's why we're adjusting RDA content. I want to talk a little bit more about implementing the LRM, the Library Reference Model, which has perhaps the largest impact on changing the current content of RDA. If you're not familiar with this IFLA standard, you'll find the full text at the link shown here. The RSC agreed a year ago at our meeting in Frankfurt to adopt this model, and the RDA board agreed. FRBR, FRBR, was the foundational model when RDA was published in 2010, so perhaps this action is not terribly surprising. There are many aspects to implementing the LRM, and we don't have time today to go through them all. But just briefly, I wanted to highlight. On the left side of this slide, the existing RDA entities are listed, and I'm sure you're all familiar with these. These entities are compatible with the LRM. The reason there are stars after the person entities to remind me to tell you that person, as it's currently defined in RDA, is not the same as person as it's now defined in the LRM. So some adjustments will have to be made. This is a problem that RSC is actively working on, and we can discuss it later if you're interested. On the right side are the 5 new LRM entities being added to RDA. So adding these entities will require new general guidance, as well as specific instructions to be written, tasks that the RSC is currently working on. In addition to new entities, RDA will also add many new elements. There are the elements belonging to the 5 new entities, of course, but there are also elements that were hidden in RDA, such as thematic index number for music, and elements related to new LRM concepts, like the manifestation statement and representative expression. The heart of RDA will be organized more like a data dictionary, as Jamie showed you with the earlier media type slide. So the elements will be sub-arranged under their entities rather than in the chapter structure that you see now. As I mentioned, Jamie showed the media type mock-up, which is how an element may appear in the data dictionary. So this slide shows sort of the breakdown of what those major sections may be, but I should caution you that this may change after this week's meetings. So you'll see that at the top there is a definition and scope statement, which will come from the RDA registry. Then what's appearing now is a large recording. Oh, I switched the order of slides. Okay, that's okay. No, that's okay. Can we just go back to the previous one? Maybe not. That's okay. That's okay. We'll just leave it. So let me skip to this one, and then we will come back. No, that's fine. So we will. Let me talk here about this, about gaining efficiencies for the production of the toolkit. There are efficiencies for catalogers, and I will come back to that discussion and talk about that slide. But with the new toolkit, we are looking at producing more of RDA through scripts that link with the RDA vocabularies. So what this will do is it will allow us to edit and maintain the data in only one place, which I'm sure all catalogers agree is the most efficient way. We just want to take care of things in one place instead of working redundantly. So currently, the glossary and the vocabulary lists are synchronized with the toolkit. We're doing that now. But in the new toolkit, much more data will be managed in that way. And I have another slide to show you that's a diagram that will make this a little bit clearer. The RDA registry, which is the public and developer interface for the RDA vocabularies, allows some RDA content to be available beyond the toolkit at no cost. And finally, as part of the redesign, RDA is moving to the DITA standard, which is a standard for structured authoring. It's a way of efficiently publishing a web publication like RDA Toolkit. And we are taking full advantage of DITA's capabilities for reusing content, which means it's a much more standardized language reuse, which we hope will make life much easier for RDA translators. Okay. And this is the slide. This is a data flow diagram I'm putting up here. I'm not going to talk about it extensively, but it shows the central nature of the RDA vocabularies. You can see in the middle that the arrows are coming out of the RDA vocabularies, and they are shared with RDA Toolkit, but they're also shared with an RDA data editor RIMF and with the registry and the vocabulary server that are used by developers for other applications. So how much content is changing? At first glance, I think people will think that a lot has changed in RDA because both the design and the structure will be quite different. There will be new general chapters that provide general guidance. There'll be the new LRM entity chapters and many new elements. The data dictionary format will feel very different from the chapters in the current RDA. However, I do want to assure you that there will be a large amount of copy and paste of the current text from the toolkit into the new toolkit, so the instructions, I think, will feel quite familiar to you. Let's go ahead and film that one. Despite all of this change, RSC intends that the results of applying RDA will largely be the same. So this is not a new cataloging code. It is a refinement of what already exists. That said, however, RSC will be discussing several things at our meetings this week, which could mean significant changes in some areas. For example, in a few moments, we will be talking about some new thoughts on serials, which potentially could have a serious impact. But before we go there, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Kate to talk about the changes for RDA examples.
Okay, so right now in the RDA toolkit, the examples are all one format, basically. And we're going to be showing you different types of examples in the new toolkit. Nothing takes the place of training and experience. But we think that there are ways that the examples can help you more in understanding the instructions. So we're going to have 4 different types, and I'll show you one of each in a minute. And I also wanted to reassure you that there would continue to be some examples freely available on the Toolkit website. And these can be used for promotional purposes, for training purposes. They're freely available, and you can take them and do what you want with them. They'll continue to be there. So this is the first type of example. And all of these examples have possible in front of them for 2 reasons. One is that the instructions are being written right now. So the examples must reflect the instructions. They cannot be finalized until the instructions are finalized. And the other one is, I don't want to get anyone's hopes up who's a big fan of bicycle racing that this particular example will appear in RDA. So if June comes and you don't see Paris-Roubaix, I hope you won't be too disappointed. But you can always add it in your own policy statements. So this is the basic set example, which is most similar to what you see now in the toolkit. You'll have, different data recorded, different values, showing different possibilities for that element. So this is type of corporate body. It's a bicycle race. And you'll have some other information to help you understand why this information is being recorded. Now, if you'll notice here, this does not have an example explanation that you're used to. We're going to try and match the instructions, the element names, and the entity names better and have a more clear correlation here. Another possible example is showing recording methods, or as you might have heard Gordon say before, the 4-fold path. So the name has not quite been finalized yet, but so if it's called recording methods, there's 4 types. There's an unstructured description. The author writes in English. The structured description would just be a controlled vocabulary term. English, an identifier, could be a code like ENG, and as an IRI, which is a different type because it's a thing instead of a string. So this, it's on a slide, so it's not active, but use your imagination that this is a permalink IRI. So this example is showing the same data recorded 4 different ways because RDA gives you that flexibility. And remember, there's not just, you can do it multiple ways for your user. So just because you record the unstructured description, you can also record the structured description if you want. And sorry, this turned out a little small, but this is another possible example. View as relationship. So this is for those of you who are visual learners, a more linked data view that you might recognize as being reminiscent of an RDF triple, that it has IRIs with a subject, a predicate, and an object. But a human can read this if you translate those IRIs into Nepal VS 1932 is creator of A Bend in the River. So another thing you might notice with this example is that this is using the, is a creator of agent property from the RDA registry. So this is the registry label with the verb instead of the RDA relationship designator. And finally, this 4th type of example is being called view in context. And you might have noticed when Jamie was showing you the toolkit, so this was at the bottom, you could click to open this, and then you'll see a range of data. So this is to help you understand how the different data elements work together to identify an entity. So this is an example for an agent, and imagine that you've just come from the instructions on recording field of activity. So this agent has two fields of activity: neurology, the study of the brain, and literature. So having both of those diverse fields of activity recorded is very useful in identifying this author. So this example is designed to be repeated throughout the toolkit at relevant elements. So here you would be seeing it at the end of the field of activity instructions, but then if you later go to the instructions on country associated with a person, you would see it again. So the example is being reinforced as you see how these elements work together in different instructions. And then we just have some URLs for more information if you're interested.
Thank you, Kate. Does anybody have any questions about that last presentation?
Hello. I would just like to know, with the new structure, are the instruction numbers going to change much, or?
The question is about the instruction numbers, if the
Yeah.
instruction numbers are going to change.
Yeah.
We haven't decided.
Okay.
I think it's fairly certain that, well, I think
There are no instruction numbers.
There will be no more instruction numbers?
There are no instruction numbers in the current plan. This was a decision that it went through RSC, et cetera, I believe, and agreed upon. One of the issues with that is that as things change and evolve, instruction numbers become a hindrance and a limitation. And as we decide to change the structure of the toolkit and to base the focus of it around the elements rather than the current instruction numbers are based on kind of, I think you call it a workflow, right? And as we change that, the instruction numbers would be all over the place. And we recognize that it's a great shorthand for talking about an instruction, but for actually functioning as a database that we can work with is kind of problematic. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Gordon.
I'll just add that the question is still open, so we need to see what the final design of the toolkit is and how the actual guidance and instructions interact with one another before we make any decisions about whether we need to number them or have a different kind of referencing system. So it's for the future discussion.
Thank you.
And I will just add in that as a former cataloger, I couldn't imagine a code without instruction numbers. Yet, as the person who's been working with the mock-ups and the drafts and trying to work very much in the new structure, I have not missed them. I don't think it's going to be a problem if we don't have any instruction numbers. I think there are other ways of talking about things, and if the instruction numbers go away, I think it will be just fine.
We'll see. Okay, I think since we're running slightly behind, I'll move on to the next presentation. We can always come back at the end for general questions. So this section, just to explain the context of it, at these outreach events, what we try and do is give you the very latest topics that we are considering. So when we had a previous RSC meeting in Chicago in May this year, we were talking a little bit about aggregates, but we were talking also about other types of areas for the toolkit. So things have moved on. That was 6 months ago. A lot has changed since. So what we're about to show you are just some of the topics that we are going to be discussing in the RDA Steering Committee later this week. However, we would like feedback of your thoughts about some of these topics. And I'll warn you now that serials and aggregates is complicated. It's so complicated, in fact, that three of us, myself, Deborah Fritz, who I didn't introduce, but Deborah is the chair of the aggregates working group. Deborah is under the influence, as you might say here in Spain. She has a cold and her voice is gone. So she's not going to say anything, but she may attempt to answer some of the more difficult questions that may come up. And Damien, I've already introduced, he's going to be sharing the presentation with me. So to remind you of the agenda for about the next 50 minutes, we'll talk about serials, aggregates, and changes over time. We will then have a short break. This is just a comfort break. I'm sorry, there's no coffee or anything, but it's a comfort break and also an opportunity for you to seize the nearest translator or RDA member to ask them the awkward questions. Then we'll talk about types of description, and then finally something that comes out of the LRM, which is how attributes change into relationships and the impact that will have. Changes over time. We'll cover the difference between, and terminology is difficult here. We're having to invent new terminology for things, and sometimes we're using old labels for new wine. And this is going to be difficult. We will try to explain as we go through. So I'll talk about static and diachronic works, and how the RDA Onyx framework has anticipated much of this and gives us a solid basis for creating vocabularies to describe things that change over time. So we are defining a static work. Is a work that's realized as an expression and embodied as a manifestation at the same time. The physicists in the audience will understand that at the same time is a movable interpretation. Is a year the same time? 2 years is not the same time. Maybe a year is the same time. So a better way of thinking about this is that the content is issued in a single act of production, if it's a manuscript, or publication, if it is a normal published manifestation. So there's a single process that goes through. On the other hand, a diachronic work is realized as an expression, one or more expressions, and embodied in one or more manifestations over a period of time or a duration. Again, a different interpretation is that content is issued in a sequence of such acts of production or of publication, and that sequence of acts changes the content of the overall work. So a diachronic work changes through time, which is what diachronic means. What is time, and what is the relationship between a time span, entity, and that's all I'm going to say. There's a question, but I'm not going to supply any answers. There's no real relationship here, but there may be something hidden underneath. So a diachronic work intends to change its content through time. And so the essence of a diachronic work is the intention or plan for the change of content. This is a difficult concept. There are two basic ways of planning for the change of content. You can intend to replace the content as each act of publication takes place. The previous content is replaced. This is more familiar to us as integration or integrating works. The second method is to keep the content from the previous acts of publication and just to keep accumulating the content. This is what the RDA Onyx framework calls succession. So we have integration or succession, or both. However, this is a plan, and as we change over time, the future may not go according to the plan for the publication. And we're all aware of the problem that happens when a TV serial is cancelled unexpectedly, and either the last episode simply isn't made and everybody's left hanging, or there's a sudden change to the storyline or the pacing in order to wrap the series up. So there's definitely a change in the change plan. The result is that we cannot describe, as cataloguers, a diachronic work completely, or its expression or manifestation until it is complete. If we attempt to describe the future and the future doesn't happen, we are creating false data. And surely cataloguers don't want to do that. However, we can describe the plan itself. The plan is to issue an encyclopedia in 10 parts over the next 3 years. That's easy to describe. And as each part comes out, it becomes a manifestation in its own right, and we can describe it. It's there, we can describe it, and its related expression and work. But this is of each act of publication or production, not of the whole sequence. When we were looking at this, we realized that the RDA Onyx framework for resource categorization had actually anticipated this kind of analysis of types of work or types of content. And that in particular, there is a major attribute in the RDA Onyx framework, which is the extension requirement. Is this work or this content actually intended and requires extension, that is change over time? It may not be applicable. A static work, none of this is applicable to a static work. It may be essential. It may be essential that content changes over time. For example, it might be a news website that you're cataloguing. And we don't want to see yesterday's news, we want today's news. So it's essential that that website changes. And in other types of work, it may be inessential. So a serial that issues at regular intervals, if it suddenly ceases, it doesn't render the previous content useless. And here we start with terminological inexactitudes, to quote a phrase. Where the extension requirement is not applicable, then we can say we're talking about a static work. We are, as a working label, I stress working label, calling essential extension requirement a monographic work. That is, the content is intended at the end of the sequence to be complete, as if it was a monograph. And inessential extension requirements are continuing works, where the latest iteration does not render the previous iterations useless. The framework also provides 2 additional extension attributes which can be used to qualify the essential requirement. These are extension modes. I've mentioned already that you can change the content through integration or succession. And then there is the intention to terminate. Are you going to stop this serial work, this diachronic work at some point. For example, if it's an encyclopedia in 10 parts, then clearly it stops, and it's intended to stop when volume 10 is issued. Is it indeterminate? Does it just go on forever, like most serial works? So we can use combinations of these attributes to form categories which we're labeling extension expectation. Again, this is just a working label. This is not new. The content type, media type, and carrier type in RDA right now are based in exactly the same way on attributes from the RDA Onyx framework, so that this has been built into RDA from its very beginning. And so by manipulating and qualifying these attributes, we end up with this list, surprisingly short, of the terms that might be used in the vocabulary to describe the type of work that you have in focus. So we have, I'm not going to read this, we have static work, integrating monographic work, sequential monographic work, integrating continuing work, and serial work. Serial work is the one that I'll concentrate on. It's a work intended to be realized in multiple distinct expressions, embodied during a time span with no ending. So it is successive, indeterminate, and inessential extension requirement. Those are the three attributes for that. This then fits quite neatly into the LRM's definition. So I'll now go on to talk about serial works and the library reference model. What happens when there's a change in the plan, if the plan for a serial changes in various ways, and what the subsequent impact that is on determining the boundary of a serial work. When does one work end and the next begin, and how that ties in with ISSN numbers. So a serial work is intended to be realized in multiple distinct expressions embodied during a time span with no ending. Notice that this doesn't say how many manifestations might be involved. There may only be one manifestation here, a website, and this stuff just keeps getting added and added like an online serial. The library reference model provides three relationships which can be used to model what the LRM itself calls the most complicated structure that catalogers face, which is a serial. And so the LRM provides three relationships which allow us to make sense of some of this. So there's precedes, which carefully is defined as logical precession, not chronological. And so this covers things like prequels and sequels. The Young Indiana Jones is made after Raiders of the Lost Ark, but precedes it in terms of logical continuity. Then there's a transformation relationship, which is brand new. And this is where one work is transformed into another work by editorial policy, by change of genre, by change of media type, and various other things. And then there is also a new LRM relationship for aggregations, because ultimately a serial work is aggregating itself because it's a succession of content, and therefore you can say that a serial work also aggregates over time. And this is the horrific result. This is the most complicated thing you're ever going to see. Do not panic. This is just a model, just a diagram. The instructions in the toolkit will make sense of this, conceal the complexity. Catalogers must understand the complexity, but they don't have to deal with it on a daily basis. And the data that we currently record for serials and aggregates will be spread out amongst these various pieces here. So this just shows how, if we take the issue of a diachronic work number 1, it might have 2 issues. Each issue is a separate expression which has its own distinct work. And we can say that the first issue in the chronological numerical sequence of the serial precedes the second issue. And we all know as serials catalogers that you often get serial issues published out of numerical sequence. So you may get issue 4 published before issue 3, and this allows a logical order of presentation to end users in catalogs. One of the interesting things about the LRM model of serials is that diachronic expressions which aggregate are themselves part of the aggregate manifestation that results from all of this. So both the 2 issue expressions, 1A and 2A, and the diachronic expression, which is a plan, all get embodied in a single aggregate. But the nature of that aggregate can be quite complex. It can be a single unit, multiple unit, and it can conflate. These 2 aggregates here could be conflated into a single manifestation. So I've left all the detail out there because when we add that detail in, we will all be fleeing and deciding that life is far too complicated. Then the diachronic work gets transformed into a second serial type work which has its own issues, its own expression, and is embodied in its own aggregate manifestation. Thank you. So Damien will take the next one.
So the changes, the plan of a serial work includes the concepts that guide the production of the issues that comprise an aggregate manifestation. So what that means is that any changes to the plan of a serial work may, and I stress may, result in a new serial work. So as an example, the national edition of El País is a different serial work than the Valencia edition of the same newspaper. The plan of the content has changed, resulting in a new serial work. So in the regional edition, there would be additional articles that would focus on things in Valencia, whereas the national edition might not have that same content. But because a serial work is also a plan for how a serial will be both expressed and manifested, it may only have one expression and one manifestation. We refer to this as a shorthand as the WEM lock. So for every serial work, there can only be one expression and one manifestation. Now, why is that the case? Because we're talking about a plan, and this plan changes through time. So what that means is just because something is true right now at this moment does not necessarily mean it will always be true in the future. So this means that translated editions should be treated as different expressions of different serial works. So, as an example, it's impossible to predict that a single serial work, will always be published in both Spanish and Valencian. At some point, publication could cease for one of the language editions, but not the other. So, as another example, a serial released in an online version and a print version should be considered instances of two different serial works. Once again, it's impossible to predict that in the plan, that a single serial work, remember it's a plan, will always be published in both a print and an online version. And it's also impossible to predict that the online and print version will always share the same content. Often there will be added value in the online content that won't be reflected in the published version. The published version could have supplements that the online version doesn't get. So that brings us to the thorny issue of the boundaries of serial works. So a new serial work is generated whenever the plan for an already existing serial work changes. So RDA can provide and will provide instructions for recording these changes to elements associated with the plan for the serial work. But what RDA cannot do is it can't say, if this changes, you have a new serial work. If this changes, you have a new serial work. We can only provide general guidance. It's up to local institutions, local policies, national bodies to say, when this changes, you have a new work. So I'm going to let Gordon explain this slide real quickly.
I like complicated slides. So the question is in order to determine when one serial work ends and another begins, we have to determine what is a significant change, and that significance is going to be relative to the national policy, and it will be relative to the actual application that we are recording the metadata for. So, as Damien said, the instructions cannot be prescriptive here. We can only give you general guidance on how to determine the significance of a change of serial work, and also provide you with elements and complicated structures to store the resulting data in. So let's imagine that this is the timeline of a serial work. It's a diachronic line from past to future. And supposing that this serial work changes language, as Damien's already pointed out, most cataloging agencies would require that as a significant change of content, and therefore it triggers a new serial work. Because we cannot guarantee in the future that the plan will remain the same if the language has changed. So a particular community or a particular cataloging agency may decide that when the language changes, we have a new serial work, and so they generate a new set of descriptions for that serial work. Then the frequency may change, but it's not considered to be significant, and the agency pays no attention. This is, I understand, the common approach right now. The carrier type may change. The serial may stop print production and move online, in which case, again, some communities would find that significant enough to generate a new serial work. And then the relationship between these two works is the transformation relationship, which I mentioned earlier. So the first serial work is transformed into the second serial work because there's been a change of carrier type. And other changes may occur, change of title. Of course, currently, and somewhat controversially, the instructions say if the first 5 words of the title change, then trigger a new serial work. But otherwise not, and then we have this big problem about what's a word. And if you are using a language and script that is not word-based, such as Chinese or Japanese, then what does change of title mean? How do you define that? And that's a long-standing issue. In this case, perhaps this agent decides to ignore the general guidance that a change of title triggers a new work, and they just leave serial work A2 continuing. But another agency may decide that frequency changes are important enough to trigger a new serial work, so they create serial work B1, independently of the first agency. And similarly, they may decide that title triggers a change, but carrier type and language don't. And so we get the same picture. And at this point, this looks incoherent. You know, different agencies are cataloging the same thing, producing quite different results. Do not panic, because the transformation relationship is transitive. If A transforms to B and B transforms to C, then we can say that A has transformed to C. And therefore, remains coherent. If you were to take the output of both cataloging agencies and put it into a union catalog, then you can make sense of this different interpretation, these different boundaries, by just adding more transform relationships in. And then the application can choose the beginning point and the end point of what it presents to the users, no matter what the agencies themselves have done. And so, because it's transitive, we can say that the first is transformed into the second and ignore the change of frequency and carrier type. So that's another way of interpreting this. But the results remain coherent. And the trick with the RDA instructions is to simplify this for the cataloger so that they know and can be confident that the results will remain coherent.
So in tandem with that slide, it has to be up to local policy and catalogers' judgment. Don't be afraid to judge things. You do it with other things, do it with cataloging. Use your judgment to select the elements for describing the plan. Use your judgment to select the elements for recording changes in their value. Local policy and judgment could be used to select the elements and values that justify the description of a new serial work. And they could also select the issue or iteration that provides the values used to identify the plan of a serial work. So catalogers' judgment and local policy will prevent the unnecessary proliferation of serial works. So, as Gordon has said, don't panic. There are ways of limiting how many serial works get produced. But RDA can't tell you that. So this leads to a new thinking of what exactly is an ISSN and an ISSNL. So because we've established that a serial work always exists in a one-to-one correspondence with its expression and its manifestation, an ISSN should be understood as an identifier for a serial work, as opposed to an identifier for a manifestation. This would mean a change in how RDA views an ISSN. It's currently understood as a manifestation identifier. So then an ISSNL should be understood as an identifier for a group of closely related serial works. In other words, a meta work. In this case, it's understood as the same work in different mediums. In other words, a print version and an online version. So in RDA, the relationship between the meta work and the ISSN serial work can be modeled as a type of related work. So here we have the meta serial work, which is identified by this ISSNL. There's some sort of relationship between the meta work and this serial work, and between the meta work and this serial work here. We haven't settled on what exactly the specific relationship would be, but it's some sort of related work relationship. And each of these serial works has its own ISSN. So now that we've scared everybody completely, we're going to scare you even more and talk about aggregates. But aggregates, once you've had this introduction to serial works, aggregates will start to make a little more sense. So we're going to be talking about types of aggregates. We're going to be talking about the difference between aggregates and whole parts, and new works that we're identifying as combination works. And we'll be also talking about shortcuts that will help relate agents that have created the content and aggregating expressions to that aggregating expression. Oh, we cut that out. Sorry for time. Sorry about that. So, an aggregate, according to the LRM, is a manifestation embodying multiple distinct expressions. We have one aggregate manifestation. It embodies an aggregated expression 1, aggregated expression 2, and they both realize their own works. So as a concrete example, we have the manifestation, the record España. This was an aggregation of lots of different Spanish music. There are 2 works realized in this manifestation. The Ritual Fire Dance by Manuel de Falla, and also his The Three-Cornered Hat. And each of these works were performed by Leonard Bernstein and the New York Philharmonic. So this manifestation embodies 2 different expressions of 2 different works. So that's type 1. The second type of aggregate are aggregates that result from augmentation. So here we have the manifestation, Don Quixote de la Mancha. I'm sorry about my Spanish. I butcher other languages. I'm sorry about that. It each embodies 2 different works. There is the work Don Quixote, but there is also the separate work, the illustrations. So those illustrations are augmenting Don Quixote, but they're each 2 different works. One has content type text, and the other one has a content type of still image. The third type of aggregate are aggregates of parallel expressions. So we're realizing where 2 different expressions are embodying the same work. So here we have the manifestation of a manifestation of Beowulf that was published in the year 2000. It has parallel text. One is a text in Old English, and the other is a text that's been translated into modern English. But they're both realizing the same work, the epic poem Beowulf. But there's an added complication. Aggregate manifestations also embody an aggregating expression which realizes an aggregating work. So what is this thing? What does it do? It is the plan for how these expressions are selected and how they are arranged in the aggregate manifestation. So here we have a concrete example. We have the book Understanding Ferber. It embodies a plan, and that plan is it embodies a work plan. It realizes the plan for understanding FRBR, and that plan was that there would be these different chapters: an introduction to FRBR with text in English. Understanding FRBR with text in English. And we're not showing it here, but presumably this chapter precedes this chapter. And that would be shown with a relationship. But we have to stress, and this is really wild. It's hard for us to get our heads around it sometimes. But that this aggregating work and the aggregating expression does not contain the distinct works. The plan does not contain these. The plan is simply the selection and arrangement of these. There are no whole-part relationships between this aggregating work expression and these aggregated works and expressions. However, we can say that there is a relationship between this aggregating expression and the aggregated expressions. That this plan aggregates this expression and it aggregates this expression. It is essentially a shortcut. The shortcut is that we're going from here to here instead of going here, down to here, and up to here. So this question here, what happens if the plan changes? And I'll leave that for you to think about. So moving on to whole part works and expressions. Whole part works are distinct from aggregating works in that the parts are always intended to belong to the whole. So each part of a whole part work is realized by a corresponding part expression. So in this diagram, we're showing that we have a whole work, and we could say chapter 1 is part of this, and chapter 2 is part of this. Each can have its own expression, and the whole work can also be realized by its whole expression. So it's a circle of relationships. And finally, we've sort of come up with a new concept of combination works. And these are works that are conceived as a whole with contributions by one or more agents, and they are intended to be integral to the whole. So they're neither whole part nor aggregating works. So examples of combination works include silent films. There's moving image plus intertitles with text explaining what's going on. Films with soundtracks. Moving images with spoken words and performed music. Songs are combination works. They have music and words. And graphic novels, still images with text. There's two different types of content in a combination work. One is amalgamated content. It's content of a single type that it can't be pulled out from that work to derive a new work. So it could be the acting in a motion picture or the lighting design. On the other hand, composite content is the content of two or more types that's associated with one or more creator roles. So that content could be separated out to derive a new work. For example, the words could be extracted from an opera to have a libretto published, and that libretto was derived from the opera. Sometimes the libretto precedes the opera. So that's another transformation relationship. And once again, another question hanging out here is performed expressions. Some cases they could have amalgamated content, but also composite content. And I think at this point it's time for a break.
And what we'll do is we'll take questions at the end of this whole section. The reason is although there are three different topics being presented, they are all interconnected. And the answers to some of these questions will come later in the slides. So this is what's called a cliffhanger. It's the end of the first episode of the serial. Let's hope that we can predict the future, and you will all come back after the 20-minute break so that we can proceed to the second issue of this series.
Please come back, or else we'll have a new work that we have to describe. Plan changed.
So this is just a 20-minute comfort break for circulation, etc. And we'll start exactly on time at 20 past.